The metallic taste of mist filled Detective Sarah Chen's mouth as she stood on the slippery observation deck at 6:47 a.m., watching the gray waters of the Niagara River plunge into the abyss below. The October morning was cold enough that her breath mingled with the spray rising from the Niagara Falls, and the sound, that eternal bone-deep roar that tourists found thrilling, made her teeth ache. In her gloved hands, she held a waterproof evidence bag containing what appeared to be a simple Kodak Instamatic X15 camera, its beige plastic housing stained with decades of mineral deposits and algae growth. The tour guide who'd found it, Miguel Santos, stood beside her, his yellow rain slicker still dripping from his morning maintenance check behind the falls. 43 years I've been working these tours, he said, his voice hoarse from years of shouting over the water's roar. Never seen anything like it. The camera was wedged into a crack about 15 feet behind the main cascade, wrapped in what looked like a plastic shopping bag from Tops Markets. You know, the old blue and white ones they stopped using in the 80s. Sarah turned the evidence bag over in her hands, studying the camera through the clear plastic. The metal components had corroded, but the overall structure remained intact. Most importantly, the film compartment appeared to be sealed, suggesting that whatever images it contained might still be recoverable after 44 years in its hidden crevice. It was October 15, 2024, and according to the faded Dymo label still adhered to the camera's bottom, this piece of equipment belonged to Michael J. Hartwell of 412 Maple Street, Elmira, New York. The same Michael Hartwell who had vanished along with his wife Patricia and twin daughters Emma and Sophie on September 23, 1980, during what should have been a routine family outing to one of America's most famous natural wonders. Sarah had inherited the Hartwell cold case just 3 months earlier when she transferred to the Niagara Falls Police Department from the Rochester PD, drawn by Captain Maria Vasquez's promise that she could spend half her time working on the department's substantial backlog of unsolved cases. The Hartwell disappearance had immediately captured her attention, not just because of its bizarre circumstances. Entire families didn't simply vanish without a trace, but because of the eerie parallels to her own family's experience with sudden, inexplicable loss when her younger brother David had disappeared during a camping trip in the Adirondacks 20 years earlier. The original case file had been meticulously maintained by Detective Frank Morrison, who'd worked the investigation from day one until his retirement in 1998. Morrison had interviewed 127 people, coordinated searches involving over 300 volunteers, and had even brought in psychics and dowsers when conventional methods failed to produce results. The case had consumed him, and according to department legend, he'd continued working on it unofficially for years after retirement, often returning to the falls on his own time to walk the paths and study the terrain. As Sarah made her way back to the police station on First Street, the camera seemed to grow heavier in her hands. The building itself was a study in bureaucratic endurance red brick construction from 1967, with narrow windows that made the interior perpetually dim and a heating system that clanged and wheezed through the winter months. Her desk was on the second floor, in a room that had once been a storage closet, but had been converted to accommodate the department's expansion into cold case work. Detective Marcus Rivera was waiting for her when she arrived, a steaming cup of coffee from Tim Hortons in his hand and case files spread across the conference table. Marcus had been with the department for 15 years, long enough to remember when the Hartwell case was still considered active rather than cold. He was methodical in a way that complemented Sarah's more intuitive approach, and he had the kind of institutional memory that proved invaluable when working cases that spanned decades. "Janet's setting up the photo lab," he said, nodding toward the evidence processing room where crime scene technician Janet Walsh was preparing the chemical baths and enlarger equipment needed to process film that had been exposed to the elements for over 4 decades. She thinks there's a decent chance of recovering some images, but the process is going to be delicate. One wrong move, and we could lose everything. "Any word from the family?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. The Hartwell case had torn apart not just the immediate family, but an entire extended network of relatives, friends, and community members who had spent 44 years cycling through the stages of grief without ever reaching acceptance. Marcus consulted his notes, written in the precise handwriting that made him such an effective investigator. Patricia's sister Carol Manning is driving up from Buffalo. She's been the primary family contact since about 1985, when Patricia's parents both died within 6 months of each other. The official cause was natural causes, but everyone knew it was really broken hearts. There are cousins in Rochester, the Kovalchik family, who've been asking for updates since the news broke yesterday. The weight of expectation was enormous, and Sarah felt it settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 44 years of wondering, of theories ranging from abduction to murder to voluntary disappearance, of false hope and crushing disappointment. She had read every file, every witness statement, every follow-up report generated during the investigation's active phase. She knew that the Hartwells had been a normal middle-class family from Elmira, the kind of people who paid their taxes on time, attended their daughter's school plays, and saved up for modest vacations. Michael had worked as an insurance adjuster for State Farm, a job that required attention to detail and a certain skepticism about human nature. Patricia taught 3rd grade at Divon Elementary School, where she was known for her elaborate bulletin board displays and her ability to calm even the most anxious children. The twins, Emma and Sophie, had just started 1st grade at the same school where their mother taught, and according to everyone who knew them, they were inseparable. Emma, the more outgoing one who spoke for both of them, Sophie, the quiet observer who missed nothing. According to the original investigation, they'd left their modest 2-story colonial house on Maple Street at 8:15 a.m. on September 23, 1980, driving Michael's pride and joy, a bronze 1977 Ford Granada with a Landau roof and genuine leather interior that he washed every Saturday morning. The car had been a stretch financially, but Michael had justified the purchase by saying it was important to project success in the insurance business. They'd stopped for breakfast at the Friendly's restaurant on Grand Central Avenue in Elmira, where waitress Dolores Kubiak remembered them clearly because the twins had both ordered chocolate chip pancakes and had gotten into a giggling fit when the whipped cream on their hot chocolate had formed mustaches on their upper lips. The mother was very patient with them, Dolores had told Detective Morrison during the initial investigation. You could tell she was used to their silliness, but she was also firm about their manners. The father seemed a little distracted, kept checking his watch, but he was pleasant enough. The family had arrived at Niagara Falls around 10:30 a.m., parking their Granada in space 247 of the Rainbow Boulevard parking lot. The parking stub, still in Michael's wallet when his body was eventually discovered, showed they'd paid the 50-cent fee and had intended to stay until at least 6 p.m. They'd purchased tickets for the Maid of the Mist boat tour, visited the observation deck at Prospect Point, and had lunch at the Rainbow Room restaurant, where their waitress, Beverly Martinez, remembered Patricia asking for extra napkins because the twins were excited about the boat ride and kept spilling their chocolate milk. Multiple witnesses had seen them throughout the day, appearing happy and relaxed in the way that families do when they're experiencing something special together. The last confirmed sighting was at 3:45 p.m., when Park Service employee Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah, had seen them near the Cave of the Winds entrance, apparently preparing for another attraction. At 6:30 p.m., when the family failed to return to their car, security guard Donald Riley noticed the abandoned Granada and alerted police. The initial response was swift and comprehensive, guided by protocols developed after several drowning incidents in the 1970s. Officers searched the immediate area, questioned everyone who had been working at the falls that day, and put out a regional BOLO alert. By midnight, search and rescue teams were combing the area with portable floodlights, and by dawn, New York State Police helicopters were scanning the river and surrounding terrain with infrared equipment. The investigation had been complicated by the sheer number of tourists who visited the falls daily, an estimated 8,000 people on that particular Tuesday in September. In 1980, there were no security cameras, no digital footprints, no cell phone records to trace. The family had simply vanished into the mist, leaving behind only their locked car, Michael's briefcase in the trunk, and a hotel reservation at the Holiday Inn in Elmira that would never be used. Janet Walsh emerged from the processing room at 11:30 a.m., her expression cautious but hopeful. At 58, she'd been processing evidence for the department for over 20 years, and her expertise with photographic materials was legendary. The film is old, and the emulsion has been damaged by moisture and temperature fluctuations, she said, pulling off her protective gloves. But the plastic bag provided some protection, and I think we might be able to recover some images. The problem is that every time we expose it to light or chemicals, we risk losing what's there. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to remain patient despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. After 44 years, a few more hours wouldn't matter, but the anticipation was almost unbearable. How long do you need? Give me until this afternoon. I want to start with the least invasive techniques and work my way up, If there are images on this film, I'll find them. Sarah turned to Marcus. Let's go through the original files again while we wait. Maybe there's something we missed, something that the photos might help clarify. The case files filled 3 banker's boxes, each document carefully preserved in acid-free folders and organized chronologically. Sarah had read through them multiple times since inheriting the case, but she approached each review with fresh eyes, knowing that cold cases were often solved by connections that earlier investigators couldn't have made with the technology and knowledge available at the time. The witness statements painted a picture of a family enjoying a normal day of tourism, but when Sarah read them with the perspective of 44 years, subtle details emerged that might have been overlooked in 1980. Margaret Kozlowski, who had worked at the gift shop near the Niagara Falls, remembered the twins clearly because they'd been fascinated by the rainbow-colored rock candy. They kept asking their mother if they could buy some for their teacher, she'd told Detective Morrison. The mother said they could choose 1 small bag each, but they had to promise to share it with their classmates. The girls were very excited about that, kept talking about how surprised Mrs. Peterson would be. Robert Chen, who had been working as a tour guide for the Cave of the Winds attraction, had recalled the family because Michael Hartwell had asked detailed questions about the geological formation of the falls. He seemed like an educated man, really interested in the science behind it all, Chen had told investigators. He wanted to know about the erosion rate, how long the falls had been in their current position, that sort of thing. The little girls were excited, but well-behaved. They kept asking if they could go behind the water. The most significant witness had been Thomas Brennan, a freelance photographer who'd been taking pictures of tourists for a project documenting American leisure activities. He'd approached the Hartwell family around 2:30 p.m., offering to take their picture near the falls for $5. They were very polite, very normal, he'd told investigators. The father asked if I could take a picture with their camera too so they'd have their own copy. I remember thinking they seemed like such a nice family. The mother was very attentive to the girls, making sure their sweaters were zipped up because of the mist. This had been the last professional interaction anyone remembered having with the Hartwells. Brennan had given detailed descriptions of their clothing. Michael in a blue members-only windbreaker and dark brown slacks, Patricia in a yellow London fog raincoat and Levi's jeans. Both girls in matching red cable-knit sweaters that Patricia had made herself using a pattern from Good Housekeeping magazine. The descriptions had been crucial for the search efforts, but no one matching those descriptions had been spotted after 3:45 p.m. As Sarah read through the files, she found herself drawn to the psychological profile that had been commissioned 6 months into the investigation. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist from the University at Buffalo, had analyzed the family dynamics based on interviews with friends, relatives, and coworkers. Her assessment painted a picture of a stable, loving family with no obvious risk factors for voluntary disappearance or foul play. Michael Hartwell presents as a responsible, somewhat cautious individual with strong family values, Dr. Foster had written. His coworkers describe him as reliable and detail-oriented, though perhaps prone to worry about financial security. Patricia Hartwell is consistently described as nurturing and organized, with a strong maternal instinct and a tendency to put others' needs before her own. The twins appear to have been developing normally, with Emma showing more extroverted tendencies and Sophie being more introspective, but both children were reportedly well-adjusted and happy. The profile had concluded that the family was extremely unlikely to have planned their own disappearance, and that if they had encountered foul play, it was probably random rather than targeted. This assessment had guided much of the subsequent investigation, but reading it now, Sarah wondered if there were other possibilities that hadn't been fully explored. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet, "Ready for you to see the first results." Sarah and Marcus hurried to the processing room, where Janet had set up a digital scanner connected to a large monitor. The room smelled of Stop Bath and Fixer, the familiar chemical odors of traditional darkroom work. The first image flickered to life on the screen, and Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. It was a typical tourist photo. The Hartwell family, standing in front of the Niagara Falls, all 4 of them smiling broadly at the camera. Michael had his arm around Patricia's shoulders, and she was leaning into him with genuine affection. The twins were in front, Emma with her arm around Sophie's waist, both grinning at the camera with gap-toothed smiles. They looked exactly as they had been described in the witness statements. Happy, normal, utterly unsuspecting of what lay ahead. The image quality was remarkably good considering the age of the film. Sarah could make out details like the small pin on Patricia's lapel, an apple-shaped brooch that she'd worn to school events, and the Mickey Mouse wristwatch on Emma's left wrist, a birthday gift from the previous month. The timestamp in the corner of the photo showed 11:23 a.m., September 23, 1980. This matches the timeline, Marcus said, checking his notes. They would have been at the falls for less than an hour when this was taken. Janet advanced to the next image, which showed the twins feeding seagulls near the observation area. Sophie was holding a piece of soft pretzel, while Emma gestured excitedly at a particularly bold gull that had landed just feet away. Their red sweaters were bright against the gray concrete, and their expressions showed pure childhood joy. The third photo was more poignant. Patricia and Michael holding hands as they walked along the path toward the Maid of the Mist boarding area. Patricia was looking up at her husband with an expression of contentment, while Michael gazed toward the falls with what appeared to be wonder. It was the kind of spontaneous moment that families treasure, captured forever by a simple camera. But as Janet continued processing the film, the images became more interesting and, ultimately, more disturbing. Photo number 7 showed the family from a distance, apparently taken by someone else or possibly by Michael using the camera's timer function. They were standing near what looked like a service area, talking to a man in a khaki Park Service uniform. The image was slightly out of focus, but Sarah could make out Michael gesturing towards something off camera while Patricia held both twins' hands protectively. "I don't remember this interaction being mentioned in any of the witness statements," Sarah said, studying the image intently. "Janet, can you enhance this section?" Janet worked on the image for several minutes, adjusting contrast and sharpness using digital enhancement software that hadn't existed in 1980. The man in uniform became clearer, revealing someone in his 30s or 40s with dark hair and a thick mustache. He was wearing what appeared to be a maintenance supervisor's badge, and his posture suggested authority and confidence. "I can run this through facial recognition software," Janet said, "but with the image quality and the time period, it's going to be challenging. The database doesn't go back that far with any reliability." The 8th photo made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It showed the twins standing alone near what appeared to be a service entrance, their red sweaters bright against gray concrete walls. They were looking toward the camera, but their expressions seemed different from the earlier photos, less joyful, more uncertain. Emma had her arm protectively around Sophie's shoulders, and both girls appeared to be looking past the camera toward something or someone out of frame. "Where are the parents in this shot?" Marcus asked, voicing the question that was troubling Sarah. Janet processed the remaining photos in sequence. Photo 9 showed Patricia looking anxiously toward the camera, her hand raised as if she was trying to get someone's attention. Her yellow raincoat was partially unzipped, and her hair, which had been neatly styled in the earlier photos, appeared disheveled. Photo 10 captured Michael in animated conversation with the uniformed man, but Michael's body language had changed. His shoulders were tense, and one hand was clenched in a fist. The final image, number 11, was the most disturbing of all. It was blurred and appeared to have been taken hastily, showing only concrete floor and what might have been someone's feet. The angle suggested the camera had been dropped or thrown, and the motion blur indicated rapid movement. "This is the last photo on the roll," Janet announced. "The camera was definitely used that day, probably within hours of the family's disappearance." Sarah stared at the final image, trying to extract meaning from the blur of concrete and shadows. Something about the sequence of photos troubled her deeply. The progression from happy family portraits to the increasingly ambiguous final shots suggested that something had changed dramatically during the course of the day. Something that had transformed a pleasant family outing into something else entirely. "I want to cross-reference these photos with every witness statement we have," she said. "Specifically, I want to know if anyone mentioned seeing the family talking to a Park Service employee, and I want to identify who that employee was." Marcus was already pulling out his phone. "I'll contact the Park Service Historical Records Department. They should have employment records from 1980, including shift schedules and assigned duties." As they worked through the afternoon, Sarah felt the familiar tingle of a case beginning to crack open. The photos provided new information, but they also raised disturbing questions that the original investigation had never been able to address. Why had the family been in what appeared to be a restricted area? Who was the uniformed man they'd been talking to? And most troubling of all, why did the twins look frightened in that one photo, and where were their parents when it was taken? Carol Manning arrived at the station just after 5 p.m. A small woman in her 70s with silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of alert, intelligent eyes that reminded Sarah of her own grandmother. She moved carefully but with purpose, and when she shook Sarah's hand, her grip was firm despite her age. She'd been 64 when her sister's family disappeared, and the tragedy had marked every day of her life since. "I've been waiting for this day for 44 years, Carol said as Sarah led her to the conference room. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and bulletin boards covered with crime scene photos and timeline charts from various cases. I never stopped believing we'd find answers eventually. Patricia used to say that the truth always comes out in the end, even when it takes longer than we'd like." Sarah showed her the photos one by one, watching Carol's face carefully as each image appeared on the screen. The older woman's reaction was immediate and emotional, tears streaming down her cheeks as she saw her sister's family alive and happy for the first time in decades. She touched the screen gently when Emma and Sophie appeared, as if she could somehow reach across time to touch their faces. "They look so normal," Carol whispered. "So happy." Patricia was excited about this trip for weeks. She'd been planning it like a military operation, reading guidebooks from the library, making lists of things to see, checking the weather forecast every day. She wanted everything to be perfect for the girls. When they reached the photo of the twins standing alone, Carol's expression changed dramatically. "That's not right," she said immediately, her voice sharp with concern. Patricia would never have let the girls wander off by themselves, especially not in a place like that. She was very protective, almost to a fault sometimes. Michael used to tease her about being a mother hen. "Tell me about the family dynamics," Sarah said gently. "What was their relationship like day to day?" Carol took a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. "Michael was a good man, a loving father and husband. He worked hard, maybe too hard sometimes, because he wanted to provide security for his family. His own father had struggled financially, and Michael was determined not to repeat that pattern. But he adored Patricia and those girls. He used to say they were his whole world." She paused, studying the photo of Patricia looking anxiously toward the camera. Patricia was the anchor of the family, organized, caring, always putting everyone else's needs first. She was one of those people who remembered everyone's birthday, who brought casseroles to neighbors when they were sick, who volunteered for every school committee. The twins were her pride and joy. She'd waited years to have children, and when the girls finally came, she threw herself into motherhood completely. "What about the girls themselves? What were they like?" "Emma and Sophie were like two halves of the same person," Carol said, smiling despite her tears. Emma was the more outgoing one, the one who would speak up in new situations or ask for help when they needed it. Sophie was quieter, more observant, but she was also the one who noticed things that other people missed. They had their own little language when they were very young, the way twins sometimes do. Patricia used to worry that they were too dependent on each other, that they needed to develop more individual identities, but Michael always said they'd figure it out in their own time. Had they mentioned meeting anyone at the falls? Any plans beyond the standard tourist activities? No, nothing like that. It was supposed to be a simple day trip, see the falls, take some pictures, maybe buy some souvenirs for the girls' classmates. They'd never been to Niagara Falls before, and Patricia thought it would be educational for the girls. She was always looking for ways to expand their horizons, to show them that there was a big, beautiful world beyond Elmira. Carol paused, studying the photo of the uniformed man more carefully. "I don't recognize him, but Patricia was very trusting, especially of people in authority. If someone official had asked for help or told them they needed to go somewhere for safety reasons, she would have complied without question. It would never have occurred to her that someone might take advantage of that trust." This insight sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The scenario Carol described matched the photographic evidence perfectly. A family being led away from the tourist areas by someone they perceived as trustworthy. Someone whose uniform and official demeanor would have overcome any natural caution they might have felt. Marcus returned at 6:30 p.m. with information from the Park Service records, along with photocopies of employment documents from 1980. "I've got the complete employee roster from September 23rd, he said, spreading the papers across the conference table. There were 12 uniformed personnel working that day, including maintenance, security, and tour guides. I'm getting individual personnel files for each of them." As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn back to the final, blurred photograph. Using the department's new digital enhancement software technology that would have seemed like science fiction to the 1980 investigators, she was able to clarify some details that had been invisible to the naked eye. The concrete surface appeared to be inside a building or covered area, and the partial view of feet suggested someone wearing heavy work boots, the kind issued to maintenance personnel. "Janet, can you tell anything about the lighting conditions when this was taken?" Janet studied the image on her computer screen, adjusting various parameters to extract maximum information. "Based on the grain structure and exposure characteristics, I'd say this was taken in artificial lighting conditions, probably fluorescent or incandescent. The motion blur suggests the camera was dropped or the person taking the photo was moving very quickly, possibly running or being pushed." The implications were becoming clearer and more disturbing. The family had been led away from the public areas, possibly into a maintenance or service building where tourists weren't normally allowed. The final photo suggested some kind of struggle or emergency situation that had caused the camera to be dropped or thrown. At 9 p.m., Sarah received a call that she'd been hoping for. Detective Frank Morrison, the original investigator on the case, had heard about the camera discovery through the department's informal network of retirees and wanted to offer his assistance. Now 82 years old and living in a retirement community in Lewiston, he still maintained an office in his apartment where he kept copies of files from his most challenging cases. "I think about the Hartwell case every single day," Morrison said when Sarah called him back. His voice was still strong despite his age, but she could hear the weight of decades of frustration and regret. "There was something about it that never sat right with me, something I felt like I was missing. The way they just vanished. It was too clean, too complete. In my 40 years of police work, when entire families disappear like that, there's usually a reason, and it's usually not a good one." Sarah arranged to meet with Morrison the following morning, hoping his decades of experience and intimate knowledge of the original investigation might provide crucial insights that could help interpret the photographic evidence. That night she went home to her one-bedroom apartment overlooking the Niagara River, but sleep eluded her. The photos, particularly the image of the frightened twins standing alone, haunted her thoughts and invaded her dreams when she finally did drift off. The next morning brought both breakthrough and heartbreak in equal measure. The Park Service records that Marcus had requested revealed that one of the uniformed employees from September 23, 1980, had been James Michael Kowalski, a 34-year-old maintenance supervisor who'd been hired in March of that year and had been fired in December 1980, just 3 months after the Hartwell disappearance, for conduct unbecoming a Park Service employee and multiple violations of safety protocols. The personnel file was frustratingly vague about the specific infractions that had led to Kowalski's termination, but it included several written reprimands dating from July through November 1980. The language was bureaucratic and careful, but reading between the lines, Sarah could see a pattern of increasingly serious problems. There had been complaints about Kowalski being found in restricted areas without proper authorization, reports of him approaching female tourists in ways that made them uncomfortable, and a formal reprimand for failure to follow established procedures regarding visitor safety. Most significantly, there was a note in his file dated October 15, 1980, just 3 weeks after the Hartwell disappearance, indicating that he'd been, quote, counseled regarding inappropriate interaction with visitors and reminded of proper protocols for emergency situations. The note was signed by his supervisor, Robert McLeod, who had added a handwritten comment. Employee shows concerning patterns of behavior. Recommend close monitoring. Detective Morrison arrived at the station at 8 a.m. sharp, moving slowly but with obvious determination. At 82, he was still an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair and the kind of penetrating blue eyes that had probably intimidated countless suspects over the years. He wore a brown suit that looked like it had been pressed that morning and carried a leather briefcase that had seen decades of use. "Kowalski," he said immediately, when Sarah showed him the employment records. "I remember that name. We interviewed him during the investigation, but his alibi seemed solid at the time. He claimed he'd been working in the maintenance tunnel system most of the day, doing routine inspections and repairs. His supervisor backed up his general whereabouts, said Kowalski had been assigned to check the water management systems behind the falls. What was your impression of him personally? Morrison frowned, accessing memories from 4 decades past. Something off about him, even then. He was nervous during the interview. Kept changing his story about exactly where he'd been and when. He also seemed to know more about the family than he should have, given that he claimed he'd never interacted with them directly. But we didn't have enough evidence to pursue it further, and his supervisor vouched for him. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied a major breakthrough in a cold case. Is he still alive? Marcus was already reaching for his phone. I'll run him through the system right now. The answer came within an hour, and it was both disappointing and revealing. James Michael Kowalski had died on March 17, 2003, at the age of 57, taking whatever secrets he might have known to his grave. But his death had occurred at the Wynday Correctional Facility in Alden, New York, where he'd been serving a sentence for aggravated sexual assault and kidnapping. A deeper search of criminal records revealed a disturbing pattern of escalating behavior that the 1980 investigation had failed to uncover, largely because the technology and interagency communication systems of the time had been primitive compared to modern standards. Kowalski had been arrested in 1985 for assault against a female tourist at Letchworth State Park. The charges had eventually been dropped due to lack of evidence and the victim's reluctance to testify, but the incident report described behavior that was strikingly similar to what appeared to have happened to the Hartwell family. In 1990, he'd been fired from a job at a private campground in the Finger Lakes region for what the personnel records described as inappropriate conduct with guests and failure to respect boundaries. In 1996, he'd been arrested for stalking a woman in Buffalo, and in 1999, he'd been convicted of sexual assault and kidnapping after attacking a woman in a parking garage. The final conviction had resulted in a 25-year sentence, which he'd been serving at the time of his death from liver cancer. This is our guy, Sarah said, studying the progression of criminal behavior that painted a clear picture of a sexual predator who had learned to use his position of authority to target vulnerable victims. The question is, what exactly did he do to the Hartwell family and where are they now? The answer began to emerge that afternoon when Janet made a crucial discovery while working with the photographic evidence. Using advanced digital analysis software that could extract information invisible to the human eye, she'd been able to enhance the final, blurred image to reveal details that had been hidden in the shadows and motion blur. Look at this, Janet said, pointing to a section of the enhanced image displayed on her computer monitor. I can make out part of what looks like a warning sign or safety placard. The words danger and quote personnel only are clearly visible, and there's what appears to be part of a map or diagram below the text. Sarah studied the image intently, noting the institutional lettering and official formatting that suggested a government-issued safety notice. That confirms they were in a restricted area, probably part of the maintenance infrastructure that tourists weren't supposed to access. She turned to Marcus, who was already pulling up architectural plans on his laptop. We need to get into the tunnel system behind the falls. If Kowalski took them there, and if something happened to them in that location, there might still be evidence after all these years. The tunnel system beneath and behind Niagara Falls was a labyrinth of maintenance passages, observation points, and service areas that most visitors never suspected existed. Some sections dated back to the 1800s, carved from solid rock by immigrant workers who had risked their lives to create access points for the power generation equipment. Other passages had been added over the decades as the tourist infrastructure expanded and the need for maintenance access grew. Park Service Supervisor Elena Rodriguez met them at the restricted entrance to the tunnel system the following morning. She was a serious woman in her 50s, who'd worked at the falls for over 20 years and knew every passage, chamber, and safety protocol in the complex underground network. She wore the standard Park Service uniform khaki shirt and pants with sturdy hiking boots, and carried a heavy-duty flashlight and radio. These tunnels were very different in 1980, she explained, as she led them through the security checkpoint and into the dimly lit main passage. Many sections that are sealed now for safety reasons were accessible then. The protocols were much more relaxed, and maintenance personnel had much broader access than they do today. The sound of rushing water was omnipresent as they descended into the tunnel system, growing louder as they approached the areas directly behind the falls. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as they moved deeper into the underground network. The concrete walls were perpetually damp and cold, stained with decades of mineral deposits, and the air had a musty, underground smell that spoke of poor ventilation and constant moisture. Kowalski would have had access to all these areas in 1980, Rodriguez continued, consulting a laminated map as they walked. Maintenance personnel had master keys and weren't required to sign in and out of specific sections the way they are now. The buddy system and radio check-ins weren't implemented until after a worker got lost down here in 1983. They came to a junction where 3 passages converged, each marked with faded signs indicating different areas of the tunnel system. Rodriguez paused, checking her map and radio to ensure they maintained contact with the surface. This area has been sealed since the early 1990s due to structural concerns, she said, pointing to a passage on the right that was blocked by a heavy steel door with multiple warning signs. But in 1980, it led to a series of storage rooms and observation chambers that were sometimes used for special access tours and VIP visits. Sarah examined the door, noting that while it was secured with modern locks and warning signs, the basic structure and hinges appeared to be much older. "Can we get into this section?" Rodriguez nodded, producing a key from the large ring attached to her belt. The structural issues were resolved with reinforcement work in the 2000s, but we kept it sealed because it's not needed for current operations, and the insurance liability is too high for regular tours. The door opened with a groan of protest from hinges that hadn't been used in years, and they stepped into a passage that felt fundamentally different from the main tunnel system. Colder, more isolated, with an atmosphere that seemed almost oppressive. Their flashlights revealed walls that were darker with age and moisture, and the sound of the falls was muffled, creating an eerie, tomb-like quality. "This passage leads to 3 main chambers," Rodriguez said, consulting her map in the beam of her flashlight. "The first was used for equipment storage. The second was an observation point that provided a unique view of the falls from behind the cascade, and the third was a maintenance workshop where repairs could be made to equipment that was too large or heavy to bring to the surface." They explored the first chamber methodically, finding nothing but old equipment, rusted pipes, and decades of accumulated debris. The air was stale and had an unpleasant metallic taste that made breathing difficult. The second chamber was more interesting, a circular room with a large reinforced window that provided a spectacular view of the falls from behind the cascading water. But it was the third chamber that stopped them cold and changed everything. The room was larger than the others, clearly designed as a workshop with sturdy workbenches along the walls and storage cabinets that had been left undisturbed for decades. But what immediately caught Sarah's attention was a section of the floor that looked fundamentally different from the rest. Newer concrete that had been poured over what appeared to be a rectangular depression approximately 8 feet by 6 feet. "That concrete work isn't original to this chamber," Rodriguez said, examining the area with her flashlight and comparing it to the architectural plans on her clipboard. "It looks like it was done sometime in the 1980s, but there's no record of any authorized repairs or modifications in this area during that time period." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the anomalous concrete patch. The workmanship was crude compared to the original construction, and the color and texture were noticeably different. Most tellingly, the edges were rough and unfinished, suggesting that whoever had done the work had been more concerned with concealment than with professional appearance. "We need to bring in ground-penetrating radar and a forensic excavation team," she said. Her voice steady despite the growing certainty that they were standing over the final resting place of the Hartwell family. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of coordinated activity as Sarah worked with multiple agencies to organize what would become one of the most complex crime scene excavations in the region's history. She coordinated with the state police forensic team, obtained the necessary court orders and archaeological permits, and managed the intricate logistics of conducting a major excavation in a restricted area beneath one of the world's most famous tourist attractions. The media had gotten wind of the story, despite the department's efforts to maintain operational security, and managing public information became a crucial part of the investigation. Captain Vasquez assigned a public information officer to handle press inquiries while Sarah focused on the forensic work. But the pressure of public attention added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. Carol Manning waited at the police station during the excavation, her anxiety palpable as she paced the conference room and checked her phone constantly for updates. "I've hoped and prayed for answers for 44 years, she told Sarah during one of their conversations. "But now that we might actually find them, I'm terrified of what you're going to discover." Sometimes, the not knowing is easier than facing the truth. The ground-penetrating radar equipment arrived on October 20th, operated by a team from the university at Buffalo's Archaeological Department. Dr. Michael Torres, the lead technician, spent most of the morning calibrating the equipment and taking baseline readings of the surrounding area. The results confirmed what Sarah had suspected. There were significant anomalies in the concrete that suggested organic matter beneath the surface. The radar signatures are consistent with human remains, Dr. Torres explained, showing Sarah the printouts from his equipment. Based on the size and configuration of the anomalies, I'd estimate we're looking at multiple individuals, probably adults and children, based on the different signal patterns. The excavation began at dawn on October 21st, with forensic anthropologist Dr. Rebecca Hayes leading a team of specialists in what would prove to be one of the most emotionally challenging investigations of their careers. Dr. Hayes, who had worked on mass graves in Bosnia and hurricane victim recovery in New Orleans, approached the work with the methodical precision that such cases demanded, but even she was moved by the careful way the remains had been positioned. By mid-morning, they'd made the discovery that would finally solve the Hartwell mystery, but in doing so, they uncovered a horror that was almost beyond comprehension. Beneath the concrete were the remarkably well-preserved remains of 4 individuals, 2 adults and 2 children. The preservation was extraordinary due to the cool, dry conditions in the sealed chamber, and initial examination confirmed that the remains were consistent with the Hartwell family. But the discovery raised new questions even as it answered old ones. The positioning of the remains suggested they'd been carefully arranged rather than hastily buried. Michael and Patricia were lying side by side, with the twins positioned between them as if the family had been tucked into bed. There was no immediate evidence of violent trauma, no obvious cause of death that could be determined from visual examination alone. It's going to take extensive laboratory analysis to determine exactly what happened, Dr. Hayes explained to Sarah and Marcus as the excavation continued. The preservation is remarkable, which means we should be able to extract significant information about cause of death, but we need to be extremely methodical in our approach. The preliminary examination revealed several crucial details that began to paint a picture of the family's final hours. They were wearing the clothes described in the 1980 witness statements: Michael's blue members-only windbreaker, Patricia's yellow London fog raincoat, the twins' matching red cable knit sweaters. Personal effects found with the bodies included Patricia's brown leather purse with her wallet and keys still inside, Michael's State Farm business card holder, and a small plastic toy horse that had belonged to Sophie. But it was the discovery of a water-damaged spiral notebook in Michael's jacket pocket that provided the most shocking and heartbreaking revelation about what had actually happened during the family's final day. The pages were fragile and partially illegible, but forensic document analysis was able to recover most of the text using techniques that involved carefully separating the pages and treating them with specialized chemicals. The notebook entries, written in Michael's distinctive handwriting, revealed a sequence of events that was more horrifying than any of the theories that had been proposed during the original investigation. The entries began normally, with notes about their day at the Falls parking space number, admission prices, things they wanted to remember. But as the day progressed, the tone changed dramatically. 3:30 p.m. Man in uniform says there's special tour behind-the-scenes area. Patricia excited about educational opportunity for girls. Seems legitimate. 4 p.m. In maintenance area now. Getting uncomfortable. Man asking strange questions about our car, where we're staying. Patricia holding girls close. 4:15 p.m. Tried to leave, but he's blocking the exit. Says we can't go yet, that there's more to see. Girls are scared. Emma asking when we can go home. The handwriting became increasingly shaky as the entries continued, documenting Michael's growing awareness that they were in serious danger. The man, clearly James Kowalski, though Michael never learned his name, had led them deeper into the tunnel system under the pretense of a special tour, but his true intentions quickly became apparent. 4:30 p.m. He's locked us in this room. Says he just wants to talk, but his behavior is frightening. Patricia trying to keep girls calm, but I can see she's terrified too. 5 p.m. He attacked Patricia when she tried to protect the girls. I fought him, but he had some kind of weapon, maybe a wrench. Patricia hit her head when she fell. She's not moving. The final entries were barely legible, written in increasingly desperate handwriting, as Michael documented the collapse of everything he held dear. 5:30 p.m. Patricia is gone. Girls won't stop crying. He says we've seen too much, that he can't let us leave. He's sealing the entrance with concrete. I can hear machinery running. 6 p.m. Air getting thin. Girls are getting sleepy. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect them. I'm so sorry. The final entry was just 2 words, written in a shaking hand. Tell Carol. The medical examiner's report, completed 3 weeks later, confirmed the notebook's account in heartbreaking detail. Patricia had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall or blow during a struggle. The injury had caused immediate loss of consciousness and death within minutes. Michael and the twins had died from asphyxiation as the chamber was sealed, cutting off their air supply in a process that would have taken several hours. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and devastated the extended Hartwell family. Carol Manning, now 75, struggled to process the horrific truth about her sister's final hours. To know they suffered, that they were trapped and afraid, that Michael had to watch his daughters die. It's almost harder than not knowing, she told Sarah through tears during one of their final meetings. But at least now we know Patricia didn't abandon them, didn't choose to leave. She died trying to protect her babies. The discovery also raised troubling questions about institutional failures and missed opportunities. Kowalski had been employed by the Park Service despite a background that, if properly investigated, would have revealed concerning patterns of behavior. The 1980 investigation, while thorough for its time, had failed to properly scrutinize employees who had access to restricted areas and the opportunity to isolate visitors. But the discovery also brought a measure of peace that had been impossible during the decades of uncertainty. The family was finally together, their remains were recovered with dignity and respect, and their story could finally be told in full. A memorial service was held at the Falls on November 15th, attended by hundreds of people who had been touched by the case over the decades. Investigators, volunteers from the original search, teachers from the school where Patricia had worked, and community members who had never forgotten the family that had simply vanished. Sarah stood at the memorial, watching as Carol Manning placed flowers near the falls where her sister's family had spent their final day of life. The ceremony was simple but profound, with readings from Patricia's favorite children's books and music that the twins had enjoyed. The Park Service had agreed to install a permanent memorial plaque recognizing the family and serving as a reminder of the importance of visitor safety. In the months that followed, Sarah worked closely with Park Service officials to implement new safety measures and protocols designed to prevent similar tragedies. The tunnel system was redesigned with improved access controls and surveillance systems. All employees underwent enhanced background screening and regular psychological evaluations. Most importantly, a buddy system was implemented for all maintenance work in isolated areas, ensuring that no employee would ever again have the opportunity to isolate visitors without supervision. Detective Morrison, now 83, attended the memorial service and later met with Sarah to discuss the case's resolution. "In all my years of police work, I've never seen a case that haunted me more," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "The fact that we walked right past that chamber during the original investigation, that Kowalski was right there in front of us and we couldn't see what he was. It's something I'll carry with me forever." Sarah understood his pain, but she also helped him understand that the 1980 investigation had been hampered by limitations that were beyond anyone's control. The technology, communication systems, and investigative techniques available at the time simply hadn't been sufficient to uncover the truth that lay hidden in the tunnels beneath the falls. The Hartwell case became a landmark investigation, cited in law enforcement textbooks, and used as a training example for cold case units across the country. The techniques used to recover and analyze the photographic evidence, the integration of modern forensic methods with historical investigation, and the careful management of a complex multi-agency operation became models for other departments dealing with similar challenges. But for Sarah, the case was more than a professional achievement. It was a profound reminder of the human cost of unsolved crimes and the ripple effects that tragedy can have across generations. She'd seen firsthand how the uncertainty and lack of closure had affected not just Carol Manning, but an entire community that had carried the weight of unanswered questions for over 4 decades. Carol Manning, despite her advanced age and the trauma of learning the truth, channeled her grief into action by establishing the Hartwell Foundation for Missing Persons Advocacy. The foundation, funded by donations from across the country, provided resources for families of missing persons, and supported research into cold case investigation techniques. It also worked to improve communication between law enforcement agencies and to advocate for better training and protocols in cases involving missing persons. Patricia always said that something good could come from even the worst situations if you were willing to look for it, Carol told Sarah during the Foundation's inaugural ceremony. I can't bring my sister and her family back, but maybe we can help other families avoid the decades of uncertainty that we endured. 6 months after the discovery, Sarah received a letter from Emma Hartwell's first-grade teacher, Mrs. Peterson, now 91 years old, and living in a nursing home in Florida. I've thought about those little girls every day for 44 years, the letter read in shaky handwriting. Emma was going to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She was always bringing in injured birds and asking if we could help them. Sophie wanted to be a teacher like her mother. They were such bright, beautiful children with so much potential. Knowing what happened to them breaks my heart, but I'm grateful they can finally rest in peace. The letter reminded Sarah that the victims of cold cases were more than just names in files or photographs in evidence bags. They were people with dreams, aspirations, relationships, and loved ones who never stopped hoping for answers. The Hartwell case had given her a deeper appreciation for the weight of responsibility that came with investigating unsolved crimes and the importance of treating each case as a sacred trust between the investigators and the families who depended on them. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah often found herself walking along the Niagara River after work, listening to the eternal roar of the falls and thinking about the case and its resolution. The tourist season was winding down, but the falls continued to attract visitors from around the world, most of them unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in the tunnels beneath their feet decades earlier. The improved safety measures and memorial plaques served as lasting reminders of the importance of protecting those who came to experience the natural wonder, but they also represented something more, a commitment to ensuring that the Hartwell family's suffering had not been in vain. The case had changed Sarah's perspective on cold case investigation in fundamental ways. She'd learned that solving decades-old mysteries required not just advanced technology and investigative techniques, but also an understanding of human nature, family dynamics, institutional failures, and the long-term impact of trauma on communities. Most importantly, she'd learned that every cold case represented not just an unsolved puzzle, but a family's unfinished story that deserved to be told with dignity, respect, and unwavering commitment to the truth. In her final report, filed on December 15, 2024, exactly 44 years and 3 months after the Hartwell family's disappearance, Sarah wrote, "The Hartwell case demonstrates that no matter how much time passes, the truth has a way of emerging when investigators are willing to look beyond the obvious, to question assumptions, and to use every tool at their disposal. Our responsibility as law enforcement professionals is to remain vigilant, to never give up on justice, and to remember that behind every cold case file is a family still searching for answers, still hoping for closure, still believing that someone cares enough to keep looking." The case file was officially closed that December afternoon, but the Hartwell family story would continue to serve as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of perseverance in the pursuit of justice. James Kowalski had taken his secrets to the grave, believing that his crimes would never be discovered. But the evidence he'd left behind, the camera, the photographs, the notebook, and most importantly, the family he'd murdered, had finally spoken with a voice that could not be silenced. As Sarah prepared to move on to her next cold case, she kept a framed copy of the first photograph from the camera on her desk. Not the crime scene photos or the evidence images, but the picture that showed the Hartwell family happy and together during their final morning. It served as a daily reminder of why she'd chosen this work, of the responsibility she carried to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves, and of the sacred trust between the living and the dead that made her work not just a job but a calling. The falls continued to thunder in the distance, their eternal roar a constant reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human life. But for the first time in 44 years, the mist that rose from the churning waters carried with it not just the spray of the falls, but the peace that comes from finally knowing the truth, the closure that comes from justice served, and the hope that comes from ensuring that such a tragedy would never happen again.